Swider-man. He's getting all the attention now.
Ooh, I like that. Swider-man. That might be Cole's new nickname.
Swider basket and a foul.
Paddy, Casey. Swider. Answer back.
Swider from deep. Laces the three. Swider. And one. Count the bucket.
Cole was not able to join us. Cole Swider was not able to join us on the Cole Swider Show. If you missed it, he had 31 last night for the Sky Force. And then this morning I had to fly back to Miami at 5:30 in the morning. And had more Miami Heat stuff going on today, so unfortunately he wasn't able to join us. However, we did have Drew Carter on of NBC Sports Boston. Adam held it down on the second mic. We had a great conversation with him. We talked all things in-season tournament. We talked Cuse, as he is a Cuse guy, Newhouse talk, and then basically just, talking ball, talking announcing. Great conversation. He's very good. He's an up-and-comer. He's 26 years old. Next year he's going to be the official voice of the Boston Celtics. So definitely check that out. We'll be back next week. Cole will be back next week. And, yeah, we got big plans for you guys coming up. But if not, watch Cuse, watch the Heat, watch the in-season tournament, watch Sioux Falls, and listen to the show. So enjoy episode 55, and we'll see you guys next week. All right, the Swider-less Show. We're very honored, excited to welcome on Drew Carter of NBC Boston. This was a long-awaited guest. There's been a lot of weeks where we've been trying to pin him down, but he's a busy guy. He's hard to pin down. He's on the move. He's the voice of the Boston Celtics. I'm sure we'll have two people on this podcast nerding out over that later on. But Drew, like I said, long-awaited. Thank you for joining the Swider Show.
Yeah, Patty, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me. I'm just disappointed that Cole's not here. You say I'm hard to pin
tough.
Down. Cole, we got
Right.
Cole on the jet from South Dakota to South Beach, so I understand it. But Cole, if you're listening, let's do this again soon, and then we can actually chop it up. I can tell you why the Celtics are going to win the East.
Yeah, I don't know about that last sentence, but we do apologize dearly that Cole was not able to make it. The life of a two-way, as we've described on the show before, and I'm sure we'll describe before you're on here on this episode, is very tough, especially when the G League team is like 2,000 miles away from the NBA team. So I think he was a little tuckered out. He had a lot going on. So, but Drew, I want to start. So as we speak right now, the in-season tournament is going on. I want to kind of break down the games. The Celtics got blown out by the Pacers the other night.
Oh,
but
Patty, whoa. I don't know about that.
No,
but it lives. Yeah.
Right now, I'm a Bucks guy. I don't know if you've gotten that. So this podcast has the Heat, the Bucks, and the Celtics represented. So I don't know if we could duke it out over that. But I just want your perspective, someone who's in it day to day, who has never seen the in-season tournament. How do you view this as a success? Do you think it's something that they should definitely do every single year? Would you make any tweaks to it going forward? The inaugural in-season tournament, what would you kind of rate it?
Well, I'm going to sound like a total NBA mouthpiece here, but I think it's been awesome. Watching this game right now, this is cool. Indy is up. We're recording this on Thursday night. Indy's up 10 late first half. And, actually they asked us to fill out a bracket for the in-season tournament. And I didn't have the balls to do it because I actually thought Indy was going to beat the Celtics.
Really?
But I didn't want that, out there publicly.
Yeah, you
before
can't
that
be putting
game.
that.
Yeah. I work with Brian Scalabrine. That's my partner on these games.
Right.
And he had the Celtics winning it all, of course. And he was cocky and he's like, oh, we're going to win. We're going to Vegas. We wouldn't have done those games in Vegas. They're national exclusives, but it was the team's going to Vegas, no doubt. I'm I don't know, bro. I think Indy, first of all, the Pacers can beat anybody, as
Right.
Cole's Heat learned 2 days before our game against them. So Saturday they were in Miami for the second of two in a row, and Halliburton wasn't even playing, and they still won. They put up 144 against Miami without their best player. And I just love this Pacers team. And I think the in-season tournament, one of the reasons I love it, it's a great opportunity for a team like Indiana to sort of break out and establish themselves on a national stage. That game against the Celtics was the first game Tyrese Halliburton had ever played on TNT. He's been in the league for 4 years.
Really?
It's impossible, right? Because he played on the Kings when they were bad.
Yeah.
And he's been on the Pacers, and the Pacers weren't very good last year. mean, if you're an NBA sicko like all of us on the call, you
I
know
guess
how
that
good
makes
that
sense, but that like hearing that
Yeah.
out loud is very like jarring.
I know, right? So it's a good opportunity for them. And I think the Pelicans, too, they made it to Vegas for them to get on this stage. So I love it for that reason. I think it's been a smashing success in terms of how much the players give a shit. Like, I hope we can say that. But the give a shit factor is through the roof. You know, I heard you mentioned maybe some tweaks that they could make. I thought going into it, there had to be some extra incentive. Like, I don't believe a playoff spot would be a good call for this, because then a team could kind of pack it in for the rest of the season after early December. But maybe a draft pick, you know, a lottery pick could be good, an extra incentive for the team that wins this. But I do think that even without that stuff, the guys really care. First of all, you know, it's easy to say, oh, $500K, like, doesn't matter to Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum. Well, most of the guys on the roster are not making $60 million a year, you know?
Also, like 500K is 500K. Like, you could do, like, they could add some shit to their house. Like, they get a new car. Like, it's still gonna be worthwhile. 500 grand is a lot of money.
Or you could just have an epic night in Vegas before you
come
exactly
home.
You know, like, everyone wants 500 G's. So I think there's enough incentive there. Plus, even without the money, guys, like, you know, being around NBA players and playing in college, Patty, like, these guys are competitive as hell. And if there's a chance to win something, they're gonna play really hard. So I think it's been a huge success. The only tweak I would make is no more red courts. And let's make sure that if we're going to use these new floors, let's make sure guys aren't slipping all over the place. We actually had an incident where Jaylen Brown, he slipped on a court toward the end of a game, and it seemed like he was going to be out for a little bit. He wasn't, because he's a freak, but he was questionable for a couple after that with a groin or adductor, whatever. I never know adductor versus abductor. I just see those words on the machines at the gym. But I think it's a groin. And so he slipped on the court, and it seemed like he tweaked his groin. So we got to make sure next year that the courts are really ready for this. But aside from that, I think it's been a huge success.
Yeah, I think the format of it, I like, for our listeners will remember, I like completely didn't understand it at first, but now I'm the biggest in-season tournament guy there is. But I actually think the groups and everything made sense. Like, I think the right teams kind of are where they're at. And, like tonight with these semifinal games, I think everyone that like deserves to be there is actually playing well. As I said, I'm pulling for the Bucks just because I love Damian Lillard. But I mean, the Pacers making it, like you're saying, that'd be like a big chip on the shoulder for a team that hasn't necessarily done anything in the past. My next question, last thing on the in-season tournament, is who do you think will be the first person to have the take? And are you kind of concerned that this will now become like, oh, the in-season tournament got so much play that now the actual like regular season games are devalued even more than they were beforehand?
Yeah, I've heard that from a couple people, and it's almost like the in-season tournament has been too good. Like the NBA's have their own success, because
like they should have waited like 2 months or some shit.
Yeah,
like,
right. And but I do think it's the right time for this, guys, because and this is going to be, you know, inside TV here, but I think part of the reason the league is doing this is because at this time of year, everyone's watching the NFL. Everyone cares about their fantasy team, and you know, Thanksgiving is sort of when the NFL season really heats up, or it heats up as the weather gets cold, or whatever the broadcast cliche. So I think it's the right time for it. Now, with that being said, you know, I actually heard JJ Redick talking about this on his podcast today, where he said, you know, really the doldrums of the NBA season are the new year to the All-Star break. It's like, just get me to the All-Star break. After that point, the newness of the NBA season has sort of worn off. You get through the holidays. Christmas Day is a huge tent pole for the league, and then you got New Year's, and then at that point, it sort of slows down in terms of how much the guys care. But I also think, you know, in an 82 game season that spans from October, and if you're playing all the way to the end, to mid-June, it's just going to happen naturally. And, you know, you can at a certain point do too much. I think the in-season tournament is the perfect blend of keeping the games relevant for the regular season, giving guys an extra thing to play for, and also just adding some juice at a time of the year where people really aren't watching the NBA yet. You know, I think the casual fan, they might buy in around the All-Star break, you know, after the Super Bowl. All right, the games now, they mean a little bit more. Right. Now you sort of don't have a choice. Like, the in-season tournament is such a big deal, at least, you know, from my perspective. I feel like this is a great way for NBA fans to sort of get back into it, realize who's on which team now, do their own, like, who he play for, realize, like, hey, the Pacers are a really fun team. I got to keep tabs on them the rest of the year. Hey, the Kings are good again. Hey, the Pelicans are good. Like, let's watch these teams. And then by the time they get past the All-Star break and it's like go time, then they're all sort of involved in it. So I hear that argument. You're right. Someone's going to make it. Like the in-season tournament diluted the rest of the season. But at a certain point, like that's going to happen regardless, I think.
Right. It'll be like Perk or, I don't know, Greeny or someone on that show will say it and make a whole big stink of it.
Yeah. Right after they say that Taylor Swift ruined the Kansas City Chiefs. Those will be the two takes.
Drew, you're a Syracuse guy like the rest of us. I kind of wanted to just give some information on that. Your class of 2019, that's right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
House, my man. So you we have Jake Marsh on the show every once in a while, and he mentioned you as, you know, having a great job a couple of years out, kind of like that class a couple of years ago. You know, Noah has a good gig as well. There's a couple names, and, you know, Syracuse is always putting out great people in this industry, but it seems like that time has given us a lot of good, like, announcers and talent. So if you don't mind talking really quick about your experience at Syracuse, we have a lot of Syracuse fans, so I'm sure everyone's going to be interested to hear.
Hell yeah. And I'm loving the Red Autry experience. I feel like, you know, I'm excited about the future of the program, excited about football too. I kind of buying in on Grant Brown after seeing that press conference. But yeah, you're right. 2019 is when I graduated. So we were talking about this before we started recording, but I do not have access to my syr.edu email anymore. Lost that years ago at this point. I can't mooch the university for a free Zoom premium account like some of us on the call can. I wish I could. But yeah, it was great to be there, dude. And I feel really lucky because you mentioned Noah, and Jake was a year older than we were, but that class 2019, those are still my best friends. And yeah, I think it's easy at that place, and you guys all know this, like being there. Newhouse is pretty competitive. There's a reason why it's, you know, the best journalism program in the country, bar none. Anyone from Arizona State or Ball State or Northwestern listening to this can kiss my ass if you think differently.
Ball State? Is that a thing?
Ball State has produced some legit broadcasters lately, Connor Onion, Mick Tidrow, Jack Kaiser. Those are my guys, but they know what the deal is. That Hughes is number
I didn't
one.
know that.
Mizzou probably gets a shout out there, but Syracuse is number one. And the reason I think is because people go there and everybody wants to be great. You know, I'm sure it's a lot like being on the Heat, you know, like talk about Heat culture. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why the Heat are always in the mix. I think there's something similar at Syracuse. When you get there, you're kind of wrapped up in the environment of everybody wants to do this, and it's competitive in the industry. So it's competitive at school. But the good thing is for us, it was a healthy competition. You know, it's easy for it to get unhealthy and, you know, toxic. Why is he assigning this game to this guy instead of me? And, you know, I also was fortunate to go to school with Noah. So Noah basically beat me for every leadership role. And I was pissed in the moment, but looking back on it now, like Noah was way more mature than I was at that point, still is. And he was ready for that stuff at that age, and I wasn't. And so Noah kind of set the tone for all of us. And Noah's like, no, by the time he was 5 years old, was like an adult, I think. I mean, if you know his dad and his whole family, it makes sense. So we had a great relationship, us two, and then everyone else in our class. And those guys are still my best friends. Like every Sunday night, we would have a meeting at the radio station, and then we'd go out to dinner because it was Syracuse on a Sunday night. Our options were basically Chili's and Applebee's, and we would hit those places up every Sunday.
Close so early too.
Yeah, right. We'd have a great time. We'd be out there by like 9:30 or 10.
Yeah,
drive through the snow back to our dorm, and that's just how life was. A bunch of us lived together junior and senior year, so it was a great experience, man. And I feel like we all made each other better, and then we all learned a lot from the alumni as well. And that's another reason why Syracuse is the best. Like the alumni, first of all, there's so many of them, and then they're all willing to help the next generation. So that's what we're trying to do now.
Noah Eagle, Iron Eagles. Legend Iron Eagle's son, who's he's with the Nets now, correct?
He's with everybody, dude. I think Noah called a game for every network by the time he was 24. Yeah. But he's full-time with NBC. He does the Big Ten football and hoops, and then he's doing about 10 games for the Nets this year, he said.
Okay.
So the Nets have Ian, who's a legend, like you said.
Yeah, that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, so those guys, I mean, to be part of the same broadcast, and the one that Noah grew up watching, like that's pretty legit. And then there are other guys, Ryan Rucco, who does games for ESPN as well. He's like the voice of the WNBA, and they have him. So they've got a pretty good crop in Brooklyn, that's for sure.
And that's
it's
kind of my
legit
point
crew.
with Newhouse. It's like you'll have people that have those connections, but you can go out and get your own connections also. Like for instance, Drew Carter is doing our podcast because I DM'd you on Instagram and then you texted me a couple days later or whatever. Like we're everyone's open to doing everything and we make connections constantly, right? So no matter who you know, like freshman year, by senior year, you're gonna have a good network of people. And that's why it's the best communication school in the world.
Yeah, Adam, if you went to Arizona State, I would have blocked your ass.
Yeah.
I
Or
would
Ball
have.
State. Come on. What are we doing here? On Syracuse, really quickly, you mentioned Red Autry's new coaching gig and the whole thing with Boeheim. Can you just talk about that really quick, about how you feel about how college basketball is right now, especially at Syracuse, from like an NBA perspective also, where you see what works there and what's not working in college basketball, or maybe what is?
Well, this year, Adam, I went in telling everybody I'm more excited to watch Syracuse than I have been probably in 10 years. The funny thing about Cuse is when I was in high school, the team was sick.
Besides 2 years ago, right?
What's that?
Besides 2 years ago when Cole and I were on the team.
Oh, yeah. Right. Exactly. I know. You guys.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Cole and Paddy sniping.
For my bad joke, yeah.
No, that's good. But when I was in high school, dude, that team was like a top 3 seed every year. Like Dion Waiters came off the bench for them. That's how loaded they were. And then we got there and we were on the bubble all 4 years. And so it was kind of disappointing. We had some good runs though. My freshman year, Final Four, Sweet 16 a couple years after that. But I hadn't been that excited to watch a team in a while because it's going to look different. It was going to look different for the first time in almost 50 years. And so I think the early returns have been pretty encouraging. Judah's awesome. He's probably a first team all ACC guy. He was on ACC Network the other night and Boeheim was in the studio. And that was funny to, I think Judah did the interview with the announcers and then they played it back on the show. And, Jay Alter, who's also a Cuse guy, was calling the game. He asked him, like, what do you think Boeheim would say to you after this game? And Judah was like, I got to make my free throws because he missed 3. And Boeheim was like, yeah, I'd probably say that, but also just really proud of him. And it's been cool to see Boeheim, sort of transition into that new role.
Right.
Everybody thinks he hates the media. And I've always sort of brushed up against that. I've never thought that Boeheim hates the media. He hates if you ask him a dumbass question, or if you ask him a narrative-based question that doesn't make any sense, then he'll go after you, and it's going to be very entertaining. But Boeheim in the media, I think, has been great. He's only done a couple shows, but he's been awesome. And I'm excited for Red. To like full transparency, I didn't really expect it to be him. I thought maybe it would be GMAC, or maybe they'd go for Hopkins or somebody who maybe left and then would come back. But I think the early returns on Red have been really encouraging. And it's obviously different playing some man, and then different in terms of him at the podium. He's basically 180 from Boeheim.
Right.
I don't see Red ripping student journalists anytime soon, but it's been fun to follow from afar.
Are you able to watch much with your schedule and everything?
A little bit. It's funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. I logged into KenPom for the first time this week. I'm a huge KenPom guy, and you can ask any of my friends. I've been annoying about that shit since we were in college, but I love KenPom. I just, you kind of have to plug in to one or the other in what we do. And so I'm plugged into the NBA right now. But it was cool. The other night I was watching the UConn UNC game at MSG.
Yeah.
So I sort of got a little bit of college basketball. I got my fix that way. And then checking KenPom. So I haven't watched a ton, but enough to be excited about.
Yeah,
games.
I was at that game actually at the Garden. That was a great game. That was my third straight Jimmy V Classic because 2 years ago we played in it. Last year I went and I ran into Jake Marsh and we had interviewed him like the week before. So I got a bunch of clout because I was like, oh, I know Jake Marsh. And then this year I went again. But I'm always curious about that, like with your guys' like schedules and everything. The other thing that Adam asked from like an NBA perspective, I feel like basketball, a problem of it, in my opinion, is this like war between like college basketball and the NBA, and people always try and divide it and make it like, I feel like college basketball fanatics hate the NBA and vice versa, and it's like they're just constant like shitting on each other. Do you feel like, I feel like it's at the point now where it's almost two completely different sports, and I don't know why you can't just kind of like treat it that way and not like hate on it if you're a fan of one like for the other. So I don't know, what's your take there? Do you as an NBA guy watch college and you're like, oh my God, these kids are awful?
yes, but that doesn't mean I hate it. You know, like I love
endearing.
both. I think, yeah, it's and also it gives you an appreciation for when, you know, guys do really cool stuff, I think. You know,
Right.
it was funny in the preseason, the Celtics played a couple legit high scoring games. Like we played the Wizards, right? And so any game the Wizards play is high scoring because they don't defend at all. And I said something like high scoring game, and someone tweeted at me and they're like, "You're not doing college basketball anymore. Like all these games are high scoring." And I'm like, I guess you're right. Like, and so I'm sort of, I know. So I've sort of been thinking about that. But I mean, it is a lot different. Obviously, the games are a little bit shorter and the shot clock is longer, but the shot making is just not on the same level.
Yeah.
But I don't think that means you have to like one and hate the other. Like, you don't have to plant your flag. I think they both have amazing aspects. Part of the reason I love the in-season tournament is doing that game in Indiana. It almost felt like a college atmosphere, you know, and Indianapolis, technically a small market by NBA standards. It's a state that loves basketball. They're crazy for it. They say, you know, in 49 other states, it's just basketball. And then there's Indiana. But I think I miss the college environments. But the cool thing about working for the Celtics is a lot of the environments do feel sort of collegiate. And by that, I mean, people are absolute psychos in the best possible way. I mean, you guys know it at Syracuse, like there's not a whole lot else to do during hoop season. You know, you trudge through the snow and you go to the dome and you're one of 30,000 screaming idiots watching your favorite team. That's part of the reason why college is so special. And also, like, you know, 99.9% of Celtics fans never played for the Celtics. They don't really have an association. Maybe they're from here or their parents like the team. But a lot of fans of college hoops actually do have an association. Like we went to Syracuse. So I think the blood runs a little bit thicker. Of course, that's a team by team basis. Yeah. And so
I never thought of it that way.
And think about the Celtics guys, like that's, I think I'm biased, but I think it's the best fan base in the NBA. And even then it's a little bit different in college. So I think there are awesome aspects of both. I feel like we should all just get along and enjoy basketball.
No, I totally agree. I guess like the argument there would be people from Boston have grown up like going to games with their parents and everything, but there's like a difference when, I don't know, you're like a student on the campus and it's like you and your boys literally only like existing in this environment, and then you have to go to these games and just freak out and have as much fun as possible.
Yeah. And dude, I was texting my buddies about this the other day, like because Boeheim was on ACC Networks, we were talking about it. We're all obsessed with him and we think his press conferences are the funniest shit of all time. But I was like, think about the impact this man has had on all of our lives. Like, this is a group chat, my best friends, all of us met in college. So I'm like, we all went to Syracuse partially because of Jim Boeheim. Like, if the basketball program wasn't what it is, I don't know how many of us end up there. And that was a huge reason why I decided to go to Cuse, is to be able to call high-level college events. And so to think about, like, he's almost like the Pied Piper for thousands of kids who wouldn't have gone to Syracuse otherwise. And then he's on top of that giving us all these great moments, like going to the Final Four and, you know, calling Andy Katz an idiot and telling people, like, don't ask Johnny Flynn if he's going to the draft. Like, all this shit, man, it rolls into one. Like, Jim Boeheim has probably had as big of an impact on my life as anybody aside from my parents. You know, how nuts is that?
We did a draft.
There's a clip for the week. Yeah.
Syracuse basketball moments with Buddy Boeheim. Like, he was one. It was me, Cole, Paddy, and Buddy. And I gave, like, multiple of my events were like Jim Boeheim moments, like him doing things. And they were obviously, Buddy's gonna laugh at that kind of thing, but I'm like it's so iconic that he is the program, and that's also adds into, everyone knows this, but it adds into why you go there and why you're so obsessed with, like, all of us in this call watched those press conference, all 15 minutes of them, just because of what he says to people. Like that,
dude,
that's insane.
Boeheim, he even said that in one of his, when he was going at Bud Poliquin a few years ago, because Bud was like, the program's in a down era. And Boeheim's like, we've been to the Final Four twice in 4 years. Like, what are you talking about? They go after it for a long time. And toward the end of that, he's like, people pay to watch this. This is entertainment. You realize that, right? I'm like, dude, you're so right. Like, I would absolutely pay a subscription to watch these pressers.
Like 1,000%. And I don't know, it's so much better because he's just like that. Like, he's actually just genuinely him at the podium, which is, he might be the only coach ever, like, who got to his level and still remain just, no, that's actually how he is behind closed doors.
Yeah. So you got to see him behind the scenes. Is that how he's like in
Yeah,
practice?
well, like the number one question I get from being a walk-on is like, oh, like what's Boeheim like? I'm like, he literally is just he's as genuine of a guy as you'll ever meet. Like how he acts, like I don't know. People think it's like, oh, he's such an asshole, but he's just being honest. Like he responds to reporters as if he would respond to someone like if they asked him that at any point in his life. So I don't know. I think especially in coaching, there's so many guys that act one way and then they close the door in the media room and go in the locker room and are completely different. And I don't know. You definitely can't say that about him, which I think is like maybe the best thing about him and like the biggest compliment to him. But I don't know if I could say that anymore because you basically just said thousands and thousands of kids chose to go to Syracuse for Bay.
Yeah.
It is true though. But I guess transition off the Q's talk. From your perspective, like you're now with the Celtics. I know you had a bunch of internships and jobs within baseball. You were, I know in Alabama, you were basically doing every sport, and a lot of kids that, choose that lifestyle, choose that path. Like you have to have this faith that it's just going to work out. Did you have like did you ever have moments where you're like, I don't know, like doubts is creeping in. You're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to the point of where you're at now as the voice of the Celtics, like I said before.
I guess. I mean, I think it's natural. I sort of decided I wanted to do this in high school. I took a journalism class and I started writing for my high school newspaper. And I remember watching, have you guys seen All the President's Men, the movie?
I actually almost watched it on a plane recently, but I didn't pull the trigger.
All right.
It's like an old school, like
Good movie.
70s movie, right? Yeah.
Next flight you take, Patty, you got to watch it. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites of all time. It's
Unbelievable.
Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman are playing Woodward and Bernstein. They're the journalists who basically broke the Watergate scandal.
Oh yeah.
And so the movie, it puts a microscope on the impact that journalism can have on society at large. And so I was never trying to, be an investigative journalist. I was never going to be Woodward or Bernstein, but I sort of fell in love with the idea of that. And I realized that, talking about sports could be something I do for a living. Because at that point, it's like, I don't know what I want to do. Shit, the only thing I like is watching basketball and football, like, and talking about it with my friends, like playing fantasy. That's what I like. And so when I realized that I could do it for a career, I don't know, man. I think I've gotten really lucky at every turn, like getting into Syracuse for one, getting into Newhouse. I remember taking the tour of Syracuse spring break junior year in high school. And I had a tour at Ithaca scheduled for later in the day. And while we were doing the like general Syracuse University tour, the guy was like, hey, by the way, there's a Newhouse specific tour this afternoon if you guys want to stick around. And I look at my dad, I'm like, yeah, we're not going to Ithaca today. We're staying all day. And so I just fell in love with it. But the dean, the late, great Dean Branham, who spoke to the prospective students, she told us, hey, there's a 9% acceptance rate for Newhouse. I'm like, oh, I'm fucked. No way. Like I was a decent student in high school, but not great. And so I thought there was no way I was going to get in. I feel like I lucked out with that, met a guy in the admissions department. Shout out to Wes Whiteside, big Vikings fans. We connected on that. I'm still convinced he played a big role in me getting in. You wrote the essay, had the interview, and I think maybe they could tell how passionate I was about this stuff. And so, they let me in the door and then like basically had an opportunity to work in broadcasting every day I was there, whether I was, practicing before I actually got the chance to be on the mic or, doing sports updates, calling games, hosting shows, reporting. And I guess my entire mindset throughout school was I'm not going to worry about the job market. I'm just going to focus on being as good as I can every day. Not to sound like a college football coach, but be as good as I can every day and everything's going to work itself out. And that was sort of the same mentality I adopted in Alabama. You mentioned that was my first job. I did local news for 2 years. And it was the same type of thing. Like, so I guess not really, I think when you find what you feel like you were meant to do, or, not to get philosophical or religious or anything, it just sort of felt like this was the right thing. And so I just think I'm super lucky to be able to do it. And the whole goal is to enhance the experience for people watching or listening to their favorite team and sport. And that's how I feel like we can have impact, is by teaching someone something or putting a smile on someone's face, or maybe telling a story that makes someone emotional. I think there's a lot of impact in what we do. At least I hope so. And so, that stuff has always just kind of come natural. And I feel really lucky to do it.
You mentioned Wes Whiteside. He also helped me with an interview.
Yes.
I mean, everyone meets him that either tours there or gets the email about it. And you mentioned like teaching and like learning from people. Do you have anyone in, it could be sports or just regular like communications departments in Newhouse that like really maybe are still there that we could talk about, but that you felt like shepherded you through and really supported you?
Yeah, so many. The guy who stands out is John Smith from WAER. So for those who don't know, I'm sure everyone does listening because we got a lot of Syracuse people, but WAER is 88.3 FM in Syracuse. It's the NPR station for Syracuse. And it's a professional station, obviously, but the sports department is run by students. And so that's where we get to call football, men's hoops, men's lacrosse. We do sports updates every day. We do talk shows. Like we get as much experience as possible. I think everyone who wants to do this should really start in radio because you learn so much about performance and like inflection and breathing and all that stuff without having to worry about how you look or like what the graphic says, and so you get to become comfortable with that stuff. So that's why I feel like Syracuse, it's part of the reason why the process works is because you start in radio, and John Smith is the morning edition host on WAER. And so we had some great times together, man. Like no one I'd rather wake up at 5 a.m. to hang out with than John Smith because the first update's at 6:30. So you got to get in there wicked early. And Johnny and I are still tight to this day, 4 years after graduation. And he taught me a ton about being good on the radio, but also just being a good human being. And I feel like I grew a lot hanging out with him. And then, all the Newhouse professors too, a lot of whom hate the sports guys because they think it distracts from the, news journalism aspect. I'm sure you've run into that, Adam, but like, if I get a chance to go to Cameron Indoor Stadium and call a Syracuse Duke game when Zion and RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish are playing, I'm going to do that. Like, sorry, yeah. I might miss out on, reporting on the city council meeting in Syracuse, but I'm going to go do that. And so I'm thankful that I had professors who were okay with that, even if it took a little convincing. And by the way, that game, probably the coolest game I called at Syracuse, we beat Duke when they were number 1 in the country in overtime. Elijah Hughes made a half-court shot at the end of the first half. Go to OT. Pascal Chukwu had like 28 and 13 or something ridiculous. Boeheim on the sideline was like going nuts 10 different times throughout the game. We won 95-91. And I called that game with Noah, who we were talking about earlier. And the way we do it at WAER is you split up first and second half, who's doing play-by-play and who's doing color. Because we all want to, call the game. We all want to do play-by-play. Because none of us are going to ever be analysts in the real world because we didn't play at a high level. So you want to do the play-by-play. And he asked me, do you want the first or the second half? And I said, I'll take the first half because we're going to get our asses kicked. So I don't want to be calling a blowout in the second half. He's like, all right, man, good call. We end up going down 12-0. I'm like, I look at him. I'm like, I told you, dude, this team's way too good. And then fast forward, he called the second half and overtime, and probably the best game we had when we were students. So that's what I get for not having faith.
That game was sick.
Yeah.
That was a fully healthy Duke team, too. I think the entire team played. Like RJ and Zion both were in that game, right?
Yeah. And Trey Jones was on that team, too. I think Trey Jones did get hurt in the late first half. But aside from that, everybody was there, and Pascal played the game of his life. It was so cool. And I remember at halftime, so Cameron Indoor Stadium, for those who have never been there, is tiny. There are like 3 or 4 men's rooms in the entire building. So you need to take a leak at halftime. Good luck. And so Noah and I are like sprinting down from where we were perched up in the corner of the building. We're like sprinting down to the bathroom. We run into Sean McDonough, who was calling the game on TV. And I'm like, so Sean, what'd you say on that Elijah Hughes buzzer beater? He goes, I don't know, fuck. It was just, I'll never forget that day, man. And that's what Syracuse gives you the chance to do, is call events like that.
He's a hilarious guy.
I got to meet Sean.
I didn't know that. He was the MC, like the Boeheim Ball thing that we have every April. The year that I was there, and he was like the MC and just was roasting Boeheim and all the coaches and all the players. It was like, I was really laughing at it. I didn't know he was that funny.
He's like a stand-up comedian. Yeah, he's actually hilarious. We did a college football seminar last year, so before the 2022 college football season, and we had these panels where people would come up and talk, like they'd preview every Power 5 league. So there was an ACC one, SEC one, Sean had the last one of the entire seminar. So everyone's like checking their watches, like, let's get out of here. I got a flight to catch out of Charlotte. And so he gets up there, and everyone had been like, okay, who's the favorite in the ACC? And like, who's a sleeper in the SEC? McDonough gets up there, looks at Molly McGrath, who he works with, and he goes, Molly, rank these towns: Ames, Waco, Manhattan, Kansas. It just doesn't give a shit. McDonough will just say whatever. He's hysterical, dude.
Yeah, he's very funny. Drew, this has been awesome. I just have like a few more questions, and then maybe we get some Celtics outlook.
Sure.
Some Heat predictions, how they're going to beat you guys again, and then we can get out of here. But I have one dumb announcer question, because I think probably like your most famous call from this year is probably that Jaylen Brown dunk. You had a great call on that. Absolutely yanned on someone. I'm blanking on who it was, but
Rudy Gobert.
Rudy Gobert. There we go.
Thanks, man.
When I hear that, like hear you saying that, I think if I were calling the game, I would react in my head. I'd be like, "Oh, hell yeah, I just crushed that call!" Like, you know how I don't know, anyone who's played a sport, if you hit a home run or you make a shot, like in your head, you get proud of yourself. There's times on the podcast where I make a good joke or like I ask a good question. I'm like, "Let's go! I nailed that."
Yeah.
Are you in the game like after you make that call and you don't stutter at all and you're screaming and then they go back down the other side of the court? You're like, all right, let's go. Like, I crushed that.
A little bit. Yeah, I probably shouldn't admit this, but yeah, a little bit. It kind of feel like
I feel like you have to be.
Yeah, take my headset off, grab a beer. Like my job is done.
Yeah.
No, I mean, thanks for saying that. That's probably one of my favorite calls we've had all year, because it was Gobert.
Right.
Rudy Gobert is like one of the most hateable players in the NBA. So I knew people would really appreciate the talk extra because of that. And what I said was Brown on his head, he climbed the Stifle Tower. And I like being in that moment, it's like adrenaline kicks in. And that's part of the reason I love play-by-play, is because to me, it's the closest thing to actually playing in the game that you can get if you're not a player. That's why it's my favorite thing to do. Like I love, doing this stuff and anchoring shows and reporting, but play-by-play has always been my favorite for that reason. And so he throws it down and it's like time stops for a second. And I'm like, should I really use the Stifle Tower nickname? And I went for it, and people seem to like it. So yeah, those moments are so cool, dude. And working for the Celtics, like it's just fun. Like another reason I feel like I'm lucky is because to join this team this year, pretty sick. People really care about the Celtics always, but especially this season because they're one of the favorites to win the championship. And Red Sox had a horrible year. The Patriots suck. The Bruins embarrassed themselves in the playoffs last year. So people are still hesitant to buy back in. So everyone's all in on the Celtics.
Yeah, I give you guys so much credit. How instinctually you have to be in the moment because it's saying something like the Stifle Tower. It sounds like you saw the play, thought of what to say, and then you're like, all right, replay it right now, and I'll say this line. The fact that you guys are able to do it like just in the moment is crazy. But Adam, you could go ahead if you have any questions on the Celtics, because I know he was just talking about how they unfortunately are. If you couldn't tell, I'm a bit of a Celtics hater.
Yeah,
mainly because of Bill Simmons. But if you guys want to, I don't know, discuss, because I have some thoughts on or some questions on the future of the season, but they unfortunately are probably the best team in the league.
Sure, yeah. So Drew, I mean, I'm not sure how much you know about this, but I'm a big Celtics fan. I'm kind of like the Boston sports guy for the podcast. When people like Paddy blindly hate on the greatest team to ever grace the court. But first of all, a personal question. So your gig right now is away games for NBC Sports Boston. And I think I read that you're taking over full-time next year. Is that kind of the idea or the plan?
Yeah. So, unless I get fired this year, that is the plan. So the reason we're doing it like that is, so Mike Gorman, as you know, Adam, has been doing this for 40 plus years, total legend. This is his 43rd year. What's that?
I said, he's awesome.
Yeah, wow, good. I'm glad you said that.
I would love to. He's the best part about Celtics in my.
Good. I know you're a hater, but no one can hate on Mike.
Exactly.
Gorman.
Yeah, you got to tip your cap there.
Yeah, so he's he doesn't want to travel as much. He's up there in age, and so he knew that he wanted to step aside at some point, and so this is kind of a nice way to like pass the baton. And so starting next year, I'll be doing all the games.
That's That's a really interesting way of doing it. But I guess it does make sense because then you get like everyone's reactions about how you're doing the games, but at the same time, you still get like a farewell tour for him. On that topic, from what I've seen, the reactions are pretty good to your calls and the way you listen. We look up Cole Swider on Twitter 4 times a day, and it's not always positive. It's not always negative. How do you respond to those comments when you see good ones and bad ones? And are you unflappable, or do you kind of like take it to heart sometimes?
Oh yeah, and I wish I were unflappable, but I can be flapped. You can get to me. I'm not unflappable. I see it. I'm probably on Twitter too much. I've started. When I first started doing the job, I know it's still new, but when I first started, I was really, really worried about how people would respond to me, because like we talked about, Mike's a legend, and we talked about the fan base too. I know how much this team means to people, and I know how much the broadcast means as well. The Mike and Tommy show was like the #1 show in Boston for like 35 years. When I say the Mike and Tommy show for non-Celtics fans, I'm talking about the game broadcast, but it was Mike Gorman and Tommy Heinsohn. And if you're not a Celtics fan, you might not have enjoyed it. Pretty homerific, mostly Tommy, the late, great Tommy Heinsohn, Mr. Celtic. And I know that there's a really strong relationship between the fans and the announcers. And, in addition to the basic human nature of wanting to be liked, I mean, we all want to be liked. And, that's something that, especially in announcing and what we do, it's natural. Like, you just want people to like you. But beyond that, like, I know the importance of this show. And so it's really important to me that people enjoy it, not necessarily enjoy me and what I'm doing, but just still can feel like they're watching the Celtics and not like they have to hit the mute button or anything. Like, they're still having fun with us and learning stuff, and we're doing our job. So I was really dialed into that at the start, probably too much. And if I saw a negative comment, it would bother me. And I would like take it to heart and think, do I need to change something? And what's been really great with that is Scal. Like, I'll tell Scal if someone says something negative, and he'll be like, dude, like, you know what you're doing. Like, you're the right guy for this. I gave you this job for a reason. And he'd tell me, like, during the audition process, like, I knew right away you could do this at a high level. And he's just been extremely supportive. And I think about, have you guys ever seen Better Call Saul? You guys ever watched that show?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a huge
I'm on for 2 here.
So there's a moment where one of the Salamancas says to the main character, "You're the guy for this. You're the guy." And I think about that because he's trying to convince him to do something illegal, basically. And he's like nervous. And so he says, "You're the guy for this." I think about that a lot. I think it's a good way to, sort of break through imposter syndrome, because I deal with that, man. Like,
Yeah.
Mike Gorman's been doing this job almost twice as long as I've been alive. So trying to follow in his footsteps is a shit ton of pressure. And I did get dialed into that early, and it bothered me, but now I'm sort of in a good space. And the positive comments, which is most of what I see, and people who come up to me and, in the arena or like out in the real world, it's mostly positive, and that means a ton. And I tell that to people because I think they might expect it to be like it rolls off the shoulders or whatever. And I don't actually care, but I really do. Like, I really, really do care if people like me. And so far, so good for the most part, I hope.
You have
Absolutely.
idea for where you want to be in like your dream goal I think we all know, like, this industry, it's like a winding path. Like, you'll get there. Sometimes you got to jump a bunch of jobs, but that's usually for people that start much lower or at a lower spot at age 26. So what is your kind of plan moving forward? I'm not asking when you're leaving. I'm asking what maybe 10 years from now, what your plan is.
Dude, the cool thing, Adam, is I literally don't want to leave. Like, I actually joke with Mike. I'm like, dude, I'm coming for your record. This is your 43rd year. I'm trying to hit 44, which is a good number for Syracuse. I actually feel really blessed because this is where I want to be until I retire. And obviously I want to keep doing more national stuff. I still work for ESPN, so I do college football, some college hoops, some lacrosse, and hosting Sports Center a couple times in a few weeks here. And I love doing that stuff. And hopefully that continues to ascend, and I get to do some NBA on ESPN, maybe some NFL down the road. But you're right, man. I think it's pretty rare to basically have my dream job at 26. And so I feel super fortunate for that. And I'm just going to try not to mess it up. And hopefully I'll be with the Celtics for 50 years or whatever.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, all right. right, Drew. I know we were going to get into some NBA talk, but I think we're going to save that so we can force you to come back on when Swider is able to join us, and we could break down maybe mid-season around the All-Star break and see how our Heat, my Bucks, and your Celtics are doing, and break it down from there. But no, that was a super fun conversation. Like I said, we've been waiting a long time to have you on. Always easy, Lewis, when the interview is with someone who's better at speaking into a microphone than you are. So we appreciate it. And yeah, I can't say I'll be rooting for the Celtics, as you can tell, but I'm definitely rooting for Drew Carter. So appreciate you joining us.
Much love, fellas. Thanks for having me on. Go Cuse.
I'm reckless, I'm dumb, according to you, but you don't know shit, huh? You don't know how I move. I'm rolling, I'm smoking and do. I ain't telling lies, baby, you know that I'm the truth.